You talk a lot about rape used as a joke. So does your argument extend to rape as it's seen in media, for example, movies, television, video games, and can you talk more about that?
We would say, in short, yes. This answer does include media. In fact, even to a more degree, because when you're putting something out there, whether it be from a film, from a TV show, from a Facebook site, you can't control the audience. You don't know how many people are going to see that, and what percentage of those people have been harmed by rape, and thus are going to experience those microaggressions that are going to be hurt and offended by that. So we would agree that the use of humor by putting rape as something that's of levity is harmful, especially in media. Now, the one thing we would say is it's okay if, for example, a film is dealing about rape as an issue, again, like a documentary or a narrative or a plot, and it's talking about rape or presenting situations in which it happened, that is acceptable because it is bringing the social ill to light that we want to be addressed. But making light of it and being humorous with it, we don't think is wise on the part of social media.
So let's emphasize that it's the way in which that medium approaches the subject. If this medium approaches it as a serious subject that needs to be talked about, that we need to try to work through, that is good, that is morally acceptable. But if it presents it as a part of society that's acceptable or that's in such a way that would lead to more of that occurring, that is not something that we advocate, regardless of whether it's in a humorous setting or in a more serious setting. If it's leading to that sort of bad behavior, remember again our idea that we don't want to try to encourage that kind of behavior.
I wanted to maybe have you follow up a little bit on one of the things you mentioned, the notion of empathy, and its importance in this context. I know that there are advocates of teaching education and empathy, maybe starting in grade school, to further an understanding and use of empathy and how that might bear on this issue. And historically, we have some pretty good examples. And we have the example, for example, of the Civil War, where many people think it was the Uncle Tom's Cabin that was responsible for people finally wanting to free slavery. I think Abraham Lincoln said he was out there finding a little lady who started this great war, I think. So can you talk a little bit more about empathy and its role and maybe the importance in education and sort of
Answer that in two parts. To start with, the first ethical theory put forward showed that we can never actually put ourselves in the feet of other people, specifically family, socially constituted social groups, and so on. But that's why our second ethical theory, as you rightly noted, of empathy, is our attempts to do so, to try to do so, to see as much as we can. We see our answer to this case as being a step in that direction. We see our answer as being trying to understand what are the best things we can do to create the circumstances that would best lead to caring for this individual and to recognizing the circumstances that they're in. Nevertheless, we would say from our first thing, we never actually can completely see that. So that's why empathy is always necessary, to always be trying to be aware of this and to be opening ourselves up to these options. Sarah would like to address that further.
Empathy is, it's the act of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, being culturally aware, understanding that your perspective on life, your worldview, and your perspective isn't all there is there. Empathy is this feeling of, oh, I'm going to relate to you, and I'm going to try to be as relevant to you as I can when communicating. And so that's, again, why it plays such an important role when making this decision. Am I going to be humorous about something, and am I going to take that risk about talking about something so serious in a joking way? And empathy tells us that in order to defer to that other person, in order to be empathetic, and to understand that they have experienced things you have not and cannot relate to, that is how empathy plays a role.
So you would then approach that in two ways. In one, in your own actions, you would refrain from doing such jokes. You would refrain from in any way supporting that kind of culture. But in the other side, in our very limited circumstance answer, if they say this is something they really need to, as the question states, humor can often be used as coping mechanism. So we're trying to limit that as much as we can, but if that individual says that's what they need in the circumstance, we want to have the empathy to allow them that, and to not make some sort of blanket thing that rape can never be joked about if a victim really feels that that's something that, as Sarah said, would help her get up and move.
As long as it is empathetic and respects the boundaries of others.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. My question is about, I had in mind another example kind of along the lines of your question about bringing, and it's okay if it brings the mighty low. And that was a question like, what about a woman, maybe who has been sexually assaulted, doing a satire, public satire that targets the mindset of the rapist, or the mindset of people who justify rape in many ways that people, see in some of the examples in the case. Would that be an example that you would consider to be acceptable? It seems to fall outside, but I'm wondering if that would be an example of something you would consider as acceptable humor.
In short, our answer would be that no, and here's why. So the act of satirization, or the act of bringing the mighty low, isn't the issue we have with that. That's not where the problem lies. The problem lies with that it's in public, and here's why. We've already shown some examples of how it can lead to confusion. So when you start joking about something, other people start thinking, oh, it's okay to joke about this. This is socially acceptable to joke about. Where does that lead us? But another thing is that you don't know who's in the audience. You can't control who's receiving this message. In research, I talked to a counselor who works with males and females who have been sexually assaulted, and she says that the healing process is much like a cocoon. So it's much like a caterpillar who comes into itself, weird metaphor, and closes itself off from the world, and has to go through the healing process on his or her own, has to be in that cocoon. And when he or she is ready to release itself and to become that butterfly, and the healing process has healed, that is when they have healed and can move on. However, as we can imagine, a cocoon, this fragile entity, being all of a sudden slashed or being hit prematurely and forced to come out of its cocoon before it's ready, that is extremely detrimental to that creature, and in essence actually leads to the death of that creature. Similarly, a victim who is healing, who is recovering from this act having been done, if that person is in that audience and is exposed to this kind of satirization, which although is pointed at the mighty, so to say, but comes across as rather crude or treating it lightly, that can have that same detrimental effect on that victim who is trying to recover. And that is why we would continue to say that no, that kind of act, because it's in public, because you cannot control your audience, because you don't know what kind of effect you are having on each individual, is not indeed morally acceptable.
And then I let you know that, so does that wrap that up? All right. 15 and